Mert Park, and it's constantly changing. And for me, what I'm simply trying to do is reimagine more voices as to be part of the conversation. That to believe that just contemporary voices can sit at the table with more traditional voices and more local voices and more international voices, that it just expands the conversation, that the weight of the conversation opens up instead of closes down. And that's what I meant by what I want to bring someone, young lady who just spoke, in and let her have a lecture on a Sunday afternoon, absolutely. Because I felt, as an artist working in the Mert Park and sort of pushing back against people saying that they understood what South Central was. Oh, I know South Central, and they would fill in the blanks. What I am pushing back is you don't know South Central, you don't know the inhabitants of any really community. And even the community leaders that you know, there's even more voices than the ones that you see in public or who have become the poster child for that. So I'm just simply trying to create a space for these type of conversations, more of these type of conversations to go on. Somebody.
Okay, let's.
Well, I just wanted to say that I think also it is. I think one of the important things though is how do we get some of that stuff out in different places, in different parts of the country. And this is one of the things that we've talked about, and we have to cement this at some point. And since we have an audience here, I can say we agree on it here. I think we have witnesses, but we talked about this idea of being able to support other communities just through some simple gestures, right? Students, for instance. One of the things that I always end up doing this, I get a call. I'm in Birmingham, Alabama, and I meet somebody who's from Lowe College. And they're like, oh my God, it would be so great if you could come and talk to us. But they have no budget. And it's like, why couldn't I just, tell the people at Lowe College, book me and I'm coming, Because I can afford to do that, You can afford to do that. And, we've been talking about this idea of putting together a speakers bureau or whatever, a group of us that would actually, we could provide those services and get, more of this stuff out into parts of the country where people aren't getting it, and that's something that we can commit to in line with Theaster's kind of collectivism. We can do that collectively, easily, right? We can. We will do that.
All right, Mark, I think you have to commit as well.
I have to do that. Agreed.
All right, excellent. One last question.
Okay, the last question here.
Okay, then two last questions. This young lady up front and then in the back, please. You have the mic.
My question had to do, now it has passed a little bit, not further in the conversation, but I was looking for, situational scenarios through which you, how each of you within your communities are newly empowered, the communities that you're living within. To kind of, I think that's a question I'm grappling with, and I'd just like to hear your perspective and experiences.
How are we?
Because legal empowerment. So you talked about innovation and businesses and place keeping and place making and resources, and that you're all very good at tapping into those things and kind of building out platforms and spaces for people. But when you're doing that, people work with the community. What are your strategies to legally empower people to create those situations for themselves over the long term?
So, just because I spend a lot of time with lawyers, I feel like in some ways I'm only now getting my own legal empowerment. That in order to create the structure of a 501c3, then decide to add a CDC, then to add LLCs, and then to close the CDC to make the 501c3 larger, to shift the mission of the 501c3 so that it can be more inclusive of a set of things, so that you're within the charter of the mandate that you said to the IRS so that you don't get in trouble. That in a way, I feel like we're just figuring that out. That you know, I've said publicly, I'm now 12 corporations. As an artist, as an individual, I have 12 corporations, and that it requires that in order to do, I need those legal structures in order to do the work, and then I have to talk about the work as if these lawyers don't cost $750 an hour, that I'm supposed to say, oh my gosh, what a pleasure it is to be here. And it's like every moment is costing me $15 a second. And I think that I want to maybe suggest that I never could have imagined that lawyering, that the law would be such an important part of being generous, that no one talks about estate planning or the creation of family foundation or a land trust or a cooperative land trust, and that these models that can help us be more effective. We don't actually have access to the legal apparatuses that could listen to our vision and then help us create the strategy necessary. I'm struggling with that, and that struggle, it's not even a struggle about how much the lawyer costs or not, as much as it is how do you articulate a vision clear enough that you can do it. You know, so I feel like law is absent. The legal empowerment is still something that I feel like I'm working on for myself. There are moments though, like when Bernita says next door, Theaster, I don't want you to buy that empty lot because I want that empty lot. And there's a program called the Adjacent Lot Program in Chicago, where for $5,000 or $2,500, Bernita could get the lot. So in one way, there's like this policy moment that she's primed to take advantage of. And I had my lawyer get my, so she lives here, I live here, there are 2 lots between. I got my lot. And now that lot is adjacent to me. So she's like, don't get my lot. So then my lawyer, it'll cost us more money for the lawyer than it does to buy the lot from the city. But there's a way now that our not-for-profit could help Bernita. So I think that really understanding, one part of this is understanding the legal structures as a tool. 501c3 isn't just a mission-based thing. It is a tool for empowering communities.
Did you know, just since you're talking about nonprofits, let's talk about nonprofits, whatever. Just a bit of information. Did you know that NFL was a nonprofit?
Yes.
Well, not-for-profit does not mean not-for-profit.
Not for profit.
Okay.
And it doesn't mean it doesn't make money. But I think that the NFL is a not-for-profit because there's a set of folk that understand it as a tool by which things happen. And I think that sometimes we imagine not-for-profits as an extension of our heart. The 501c3 structure has nothing to do with our hearts, and I really wish that we would learn that. It's a structure where wealthy people can give money to a thing and receive a write-off. That's what it is. It's a tool. And so I think sometimes we get confused between like it's the vehicle through which I can do the thing that God has put me on earth to do. Okay, it's that too. But it's also a repository that allows people to be generous toward a set of mission-based ideas.
Well, I'll just say from the other side, legally, because we deal with TAYs and foster kids, which has so much to do with
What's a
legality.
TAY? I'm sorry.
Traditional adult use, they're transitioning out of the foster care system. And we're really concerned if they are if they're in school, they can stay until they're 21. So much of working with foster kids has to do with legal that Art and Practice actually has a very strong research and resource component that we're in the 9008 zip code. So what we do legally is try to find all of the legal organizations, all of the resources in there to actually help them with crises that happen constantly. So this idea, I actually like law, especially in victimized communities or in people who feel that the law cannot work for them. So I'm very much interested in finding, vetting out the resources that can create, again, these sustainable, emotional, psychological, physical, legal platforms for them. So we have a very strong, we're partnering with the university only in the research of this. I would say 30 or 35% of our time is really invested in simply finding out these things, more actually than programming at this point, more than the contemporary art part at this point.
Yeah. Well, I have to say this, but I kind of tend towards sometimes the illegal stuff. I like that, right? But the problem with it is that Project has become, too big and too much stuff, whatever. And so you can't get away with the illegal stuff like we used to. But I'm always interested in that stuff. How do you kind of skirt around the edge of things and play with the edge, of things? Because sometimes what happens is when you brush up against these kind of legal things, it gives you opportunity to kind of reconsider some things, right? We have been operating this youth education program for about 7 or 8 years or something like that, and all of a sudden one day somebody knocked at the door and said, "Where's your child care license?" Well, we don't have one. We didn't quite know we were doing child care. And but then they told us we had to do child care. We had to do this whole, and then it just turned into this whole opportunity to kind of figure out, what does that mean? How do we shift and continue to do this program in a way? And it led us to a relationship with the church across the street and accessing and trying to kind of give them a vehicle through which they could be more engaged in the community by hosting the program and that kind of stuff. So I'm always, I understand there's the big legal stuff that's all important, but I think, it's interesting for artists to kind of look at those little edges and how you can play with them. And I always play with them to the point that I don't want to go to jail, that's for sure. Nobody's going to jail, But there's room, though, I think, to be able to kind of stand outside of the legal structure, almost in a way that you kind of challenge it. In a sense.
Or expand it. One last question.
Well, it's interesting how you all kind of wrap that up, which leads me to a quote that I like, and it's, creativity is the willingness to make mistakes, but art is knowing which ones to keep. And it just seems like that's what the three of you have done. Rick, I know, so I know that's what you've done. But I'm wondering if you can take some of the things that have seemed to be catastrophic mistakes and turn them into something else. What helps you to do that? And the second part of this question is, I know that each of these corporate structures and ideas were your vision, but how do you incorporate the visions of not the next generation, because right here in this room are probably 3, 4, 5 generations, depending on, who's the father or the mother or the daughter or the son, et cetera, but how do you incorporate the visions of others into your work so that it can become what it's supposed to be, what it is supposed to be, I think, for the good of the community that particular art sits.
That question's too hard.
So maybe the second part first, because I remember that question. And maybe to be a little bit provocative, since this is our last run. I'd like to imagine that I can reserve the right to be an artist who makes because I want to make, and I'll make whatever I want, and that there's a tremendous amount of agency that I can deploy as an individual in the neighborhood that I live in, and I ain't got to ask nobody. And that sometimes that agency will have benefit for other people, and sometimes it won't. But then there are times when I'm working through the not-for-profit, and the not-for-profit has a mission, and that mission is a public mission, and it receives public cash, and it has the responsibility to be a particular kind of transparent and mission-based. Then I have this job at the University of Chicago, which is seen as a very big white gorilla in the room all the time. And the work that I'm doing is in a largely African-American community. And more than the not-for-profit, the work through the University of Chicago has the extreme burden of utter transparency. And because there's been such a history of bad relations, that the symbolic work that happens through the university, it has to land right. It doesn't have the luxury of a failure. But what I found is that I actually need all three mechanisms in order to feel like I have a full practice. That I want to reserve the right to have independent autonomy in a decision. And I want to believe that sometimes by virtue of my intent or my belief structure, that I'm making a work that automatically includes or considers others. That is, rarely do I feel reckless, And so some of it is like, you got to kind of check yourself on the front end. Like, I would probably rather work at Burning Man and be, if I wanted to be like a certain kind of reckless, I would probably do it outside of a community of people where I know that the decisions and the things that I say are gonna have an immediate consequence. That if I decide to put a 4-inch berm around my house and I don't talk to my neighbors, they're gonna be like, what's all that new dirt you got up on your backyard? That I know that there's some consequences. And so I feel like some of this is like that good common sense that your mama give you, where you just wouldn't make certain decisions without considering other people. There's another part of this that we won't talk about it today that has to do with money. And I'm also really conscious of the fact that there is a way in which we can make it rain in this moment. I'm thinking about the club.
Yeah.
And we can make, and as a result, how can we be intentional about the creation of new economies? So lately, a lot of the practice has been just thinking about economy, and not just money, but just kind of the economy of resources and how they flow, and thinking, one way that I can kind of ensure that I consider other folk is by making sure that that there's an immediate dispersal or dispersion of opportunity. And that's been really, it's been the way that it's made sense that I continue to live where I live.
I think that what I try to do with the sort of foundation is the same thing I do in my studio practice. I'm not afraid to say that I don't know and that I've made a mistake, and to back up and to rechart. It can be difficult if you sort of don't allow yourself that vulnerability. I don't think that the failure for me is never the problem, but trying to save face can make it even worse. So I don't know everything, and even in my studio work, I'll start off with good intentions, but I can go halfway through a project and realize that actually this is just not working, and have to back up. And same thing with in the foundation. What I think I know, some of it's right, and then some of it has to be adjusted. And so allowing myself that flexibility and really doing more listening has been very, very helpful to me. And to really have a spirit of, I always have gratitude. Like when it's getting to be too much, just having gratitude for being here, being able to do this at this time, and keeping that flexibility. I always hate when sometimes I'm in the studio and I'll ask someone that's working with me and I'll use a word and I'll say, oh, do you know what that word is? And they'll say no. And I'll go, oh, you should say something so that we can continue the conversation. Because often language can alienate us from each other more than bring us together. So I just try, even with failures, and I've had failures like everyone else, if you can stay vulnerable and flexible with it, it actually becomes a tool to bring everyone together and to pull together. So that's the question that I really responded to, that part, the way you put it.
Yeah, and Mark, because you hit my whole thing on the head. Is that one? I think, probably from my perspective, probably one of my strengths in the work that I do is I know my limitations, right? I just know that, I just can't do most of the things that need to happen in order to make the work happen. But even sometimes, I even sell myself short. I don't even work up to my potential sometimes for the sake of creating the opportunity for someone else, right? And that becomes the catalytic moment when there's an opportunity to do something, but to be able to see within the sphere of the relationship where someone else doing it would, maybe do it better, may not do it as well, but they would, the value of the experience of doing it would be much more for them than me. And that's kind of the way that I feel that it's important to engage people on that level.